Welcome to another episode of Untethered Talks. I recently spoke with Eric Peters, who runs the website ericpetersautos.com. Eric specializes in automotive information, libertarian politics, and the ever-oppressive government encroachment on gas vehicles. Eric has written several articles for the Chicago Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Times. And in this episode, we talk a lot about the future of cars, ESG, and many of the relevant news stories and social issues of our day. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Vince. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So in the corrupt times that we live in, I think comedy is my preferred form of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your favorite comedians, comedic movies or shows?
Oh, boy. Well, I agree with you. And sometimes I think that ridicule is even better than comedy when it comes to poking holes in tyranny. And that's why one of my favorites is George Carlin, who's not with us any longer, unfortunately. But George Carlin was both funny and brilliant in that his routines were highly amusing, but at the same time, full of really thought-provoking things. Those not familiar with Carlin's stuff, strongly recommend people go back and watch them. Let's see, as far as films, what am I going to come up with here with films? I'm going to go with TV shows. I think I thought about writing a book, and somebody's probably already written this book. Everything I needed to know about life I learned from Star Trek, the original series, not the woke, politically correct modern one, but the original '60s series. And I'm serious about that. I thought that a lot of the episodes from that series, while hammily acted and with cheesy special effects, had really excellent points. One of the ones that I riffed off of was the episode where the Enterprise crew goes to this planet where the people are kind of in a zombie-like state, and they're enthralled to this computer called Landru. Are you familiar with the episode?
I'm not familiar with Star Trek very often. I haven't seen hardly many episodes, but go ahead.
Well, it was as if they anticipated 50 years ago what we would be dealing with during all of this weaponized hypochondria and monomania. The population were in a trance. They were zombies, and they would approach each other and go, "Are you of the body? Praise be to Landru." Landru, and Landru being Dr. Fauci, and these authorities that would insist that people just obey. It is for the good of the body. You are doing your part. And that's just one example. There are many others. So, I grew up watching those reruns, and they were a very formative experience for me.
Wow. Cool. What kind of music or musical artists do you like best?
I guess kind of eclectically. I'm a Gen X guy. So, of course, I grew up with glam rock, big fan of that, but also classic rock, including Rush, particularly, which had a libertarian bent back in the day. And I also like old school pop. Now, I admit I'm starting to get into that area of, hey, kids, get off my lawn, and that I don't pay much attention to the latest, newest stuff, because I just can't relate to it. And I think that's probably true of every single generation. But otherwise, I like and respect and can appreciate practically all forms of music except polka.
Polka. Do you like punk rock?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. Johnny Rotten.
I hate punk rock. I just wanted to ask.
That's
one of the only ones that I would say no to.
What I like about it, and again, this is just a high school reference, because, being an 80s kid, that was as anti-authoritarian and rebellious as you could get back in the day, and that resonated. And it probably is true today that a lot of kids like rap. I don't like rap personally, but I think they like rap because it's similar in that it's anti-authority, which is a healthy thing, I think. At least questioning of authority, asking why. Okay, you want me to do something. Why should I do it? Explain it to me and give me a good reason before I do it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of rebellion. I mean, maybe there's some things I could understand with that. I just never liked the drum beats. The drum beats didn't have enough groove for me personally. I'm kind of a groove guy. So I noticed that your icon is a clover, and it says "Don't be a clover." What's the story behind that?
Boy, that goes way back. That's kind of inside baseball, and it's sort of a fun thing, I think. If you have a website, or if you have a little club, sometimes there are terms that people within that little group will know the meaning of, that people outside the group might not know the meaning of. So this goes way back, probably about 15 years ago. I had a persistent troll on the site who identified himself or herself, I don't know whether it was a man or a woman, as Clover. And this person could be predicted upon to make comments that were endlessly slavish, pro-government, and derisive of anybody who questioned authority. And also on top of that, he was one of these people who defended squatting in the left lane, going at or below the speed limit, and refusing to just move over and yield to faster moving traffic. So that's the origin of the clover.
Sounds like you do a lot of inside jokes.
Well, yeah, I try to maintain a sense of humor. I think that's important. If we can't do that, we get. I think we run the risk of getting mired in depression. And then it defeats you. You feel as though there's no hope and you can't do anything. And so I do my best personally to try to keep a smile on my face to the extent that I can, and to the extent that I'm able to help other people smile in the face of tyranny too.
So I also kind of read that you're an animal lover. What kind of animals do you own?
Well, let's see. I've got a small menagerie of cats, both inside and outside. We've got a lab German Shepherd mixed dog, and we've got chickens and ducks too. And we've got koi in the pond outside too.
Yeah. Now, I consider you to be an expert on cars. Can you tell people a few reasons why a massive transition to electric vehicles would be a bad thing for the world?
Well, it's a bad thing for the individual, at least at this juncture. The average electric vehicle costs about $40,000, and that represents an increase in the cost of a new car of about $15,000. So you're talking about expecting people to pay a substantially increased price for their next new car. And you're also asking them to accept functional liabilities that they do not have to deal with right now. We live in a world where, it's nice to go to a fast food place and you get your burger in 5 minutes and you're on your way. When you need to refuel your car, you don't really have to think about it. You can run it down to fumes. You can just pull into any gas station and you can fill the thing back up to full in less than 5 minutes and be on your way. You don't have to plan your life around that. With electric cars, it's not just that the range is substantially less than the range of a non-electric car. There's this problem of having to wait for the recharge. And one of the things that people should be made aware of, which they're not being made aware of, in my opinion, by the general press, you hear a lot of talk about these fast chargers. And I always put that in air fingers quotes, because fast means 30 to 45 minutes. So you're talking about at least 5 to 6 times as long as it would take to fuel up your ordinary car. But you can only do that at one of these commercial charging stations, not at home, because private homes, are simply not wired to deal with 400 to 800 volt high capacity lithium ion electric car batteries. So if you look at how long it takes to charge at home, you're looking at generally between 9 and 11 hours using a 240 volt, and that's the highest thing you can get, generally speaking, at home, dryer type or stove type outlet. So think about that. Think about what that imposes on you in terms of having to plan your life around that, and how the spontaneity of just being able to jump in your car, including if there's an emergency. You get home in your electric car, let's say, and you only have 5% of a charge left. And you think, oh, no big deal. I'm going to be just charging it overnight. I won't need the car till the morning. But then there's an emergency, something happens. Your kid has an accident. You've got to take your kid to the hospital right now. What are you going to do? Well, you're not going to take your electric car because it's not going to get there. And these are the sorts of things that people need to be aware of. Another thing is that the electric car, in addition to being more expensive when you buy it new, has a built-in limited shelf life for the battery. Batteries lose the capacity to retain charge after they are subjected to repetitive discharge and recharge cycling. Everybody knows this. Your laptop battery, your cell phone battery, the battery in your car, after a while, the charge capacity diminishes and decreases. But the electric car battery is enormous. It's not like the battery that's in your laptop. It's a little thing, and it's relatively inexpensive relative to the value of your laptop. You're talking about $7,500, $10,000, sometimes more than that, depending which battery, which vehicle that you're talking about. And are you going to spend $10,000 on a depreciated 8, 9, 10-year-old electric car that at that point might only be worth $15,000 or $10,000? People don't understand that, and they're going to be hit with these costs as well as these leashes, if you will, these cords that are going to tether them to this centralized control apparatus as opposed to the freedoms that we have taken for granted of being able just to jump in your car whenever you feel like it, go wherever you like, without really having to think about where you're going to get fuel, how long you're going to have to stop. And I think it's tragic that people are on the verge of losing that and without really understanding what they're going to be giving away.
Do you think the proliferation of hydrogen electric vehicles would be the right solution to ease some of the fears of climate alarmists of the world? And if so, would there be any negative side effects if they did that?
Well, first of all, I don't think we should appease the fears of climate alarmists. I think that we should act based on facts. And I think it's imperative that we require them not merely to assert that there is a catastrophic climate crisis and we're all going to drown or burn to death or whatever it is, but prove it. I think that should be the standard with regard to everything. Establish that the prospect for harm is greater than the harm that would be imposed by the supposed solution. That's for openers. And I don't understand why we would want to give up something that is inexpensive, that's inefficient, that's efficient, that works really well, by which I mean gas combustion engines, for something that's much more expensive and has a slew of functional problems in addition to that. I'm not opposed to hydrogen, but if you look at the cost, for example, Toyota has a hydrogen-powered car, fuel cell-powered car called the Mirai, and it's similar to a Camry. It's a mid-sized four-door sedan. And the thing's $50,000, $50,000. And you can pick up a Camry, just a standard Camry, for about $25,000. So again, you're talking about doubling the price of the car. And also, the car is going to be using a technology that's much more complex. And generally speaking, the more complex a thing is, the more likely it is to develop problems and be expensive to repair when those problems occur. So it just baffles me to think why anybody would think it's a good idea. It used to be that we expected new cars to get better in that they would become less expensive. They would have more features. They would have more power. They would get better mileage. They would be an improvement over what came before. That was the usual thing with the new model year. Now it's like we're going in reverse, and they're trying to do everything they can to make cars go not as far, to be less convenient, and to be more expensive. It's a truly bizarre state of affairs.
These guys are very, very persistent. And I just wondered if there's a way we can just make the liberals go in a different direction, so that they can, hey, give this a shot. This will be low emissions, right?
Well, I don't know. I think the best way to combat this is to, among other things, insist on specificity. I think it's very telling that they shifted the verbiage away from, remember when it was global cooling, and then it became global warming. And when the data in the real world, as opposed to their hypothetical computer models and predictions, didn't line up with their hysteric assertions about the globe cooling or the globe warming, they had a problem. So what did they do? They came up with this term climate change. I cannot think of a term that's less scientific than climate change. It has no specificity. It's impossible to pin that down. What do you mean, climate change? Define that. So, what they've done is
climate changes.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, in a demagogic kind of way, because it can encompass anything. If it's 95 degrees today, oh my God, the climate has changed. And if we get to January and it's 15 degrees below zero, oh my gosh, the climate has changed. It's just a clue. It's almost a red siren. Look, they're feeding you a bunch of bokum. If they had a substantive argument with facts, they would adduce them. They would produce, okay, yeah, the globe is warming. Here's why, and here's the evidence. Here's the proof. And I don't think any reasonable person would object if we really were facing some kind of a catastrophe that was caused by us driving cars. Yeah, okay, I get it. Maybe we have to do something about that, but that's just not the case. We're being pushed and herded in the name of this faux environmentalism, which has become the stalking horse or the replacement for what used to be just communism. I mean, that's what they want. They want this organized, this highly collectivized, centralized administrative state run by them, and they're using, rather than playing on the sympathy of the workers and the proletariat, as the old style communists did 100 years ago, they're guilting us all that we're despoiling the earth for driving cars, and we just better give them up for the sake of the common good.
Yeah. Are there any automakers that you think will continue to make gas vehicles? It seems like they're all preparing to make only electrical vehicles because of the government. What do you think?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point. Some are hedging their bets, and a good example of that being Toyota. The CEO of the company actually said something recently about them not being ready, and they are for prime time and not mass market viable just yet. So even though they're paying some lip service to this electrification agenda because they have to in order to meet the regulatory standards that the government has put out, they're not going full tilt like Volkswagen did. Volkswagen, after being shamed by the Dieselgate thing, and being portrayed and vilified in the media as, again, basically the equivalent of people who pour motor oil in the storm sewer. They committed entirely to electrifying the entire product portfolio. I think by 2025, it might even be 2024. I can't remember, but a lot of them, I know this because I know people in the business. They know it's not going to happen. They know it can't happen because of economics. Leaving aside, even if you believe in all this climate change stuff, even if you think electric cars are the duck's guts, the bottom line is most Americans simply cannot afford to spend $40,000, $50,000 on an electric car. End of discussion. I'd like to have a private jet. I think it's a great idea. I'd love to be able to just jump in my private jet and go wherever I want to go whenever I feel like it. But I can't afford a private jet. That's the end of the discussion. And most people can't afford to put triple pane Pella storm windows on their homes either. That's just the purely economic problem. I point out that the market for luxury cars, not necessarily electric cars, just luxury cars, is inherently limited because of the cost factor. And now you've got this exacerbating problem in that our money has been devalued by about 10% over the last year. And, so now really that $40,000 electric car is substantially more expensive than that because your dollar buys 10% less this year than it did last year. People are rightly worried about whether they're going to be able to buy food. Forget electric cars. It's just not going to happen.
I have an interesting question for you, kind of in vein with what you're saying. Nikola Tesla, the famous scientist, he theorized that you could send wireless power into the atmosphere and into the ground. Do you think that technology? I know they would never do that because that would be free energy, and that's never going to happen. Yeah. But theoretically, could they do that? Or if they would do something like that, could they make electric cars work? To where you wouldn't have issues?
I think if they, I'm going to be really cynical and even paranoid here. I think if such a thing were possible, I think they'd suppress it because the last thing that they want is essentially free energy and free mobility. I mean, that would be great, wouldn't it? If you could have an electric car, let's say, and it could simply receive electricity over the air, over the ether, and it would be available to everybody essentially at no cost. That would be freeing. And that would be a problem, I think, for the powers that be. There is a related story here, I'll tell you, that I think bears on this. Shortly before Dieselgate broke with Volkswagen, Volkswagen was working on a diesel-electric hybrid that would have got something like 150 miles per gallon. That got kiboshed. Here's a vehicle that would have really dramatically reduced fuel consumption and emissions, because after all, if the thing can go 150 miles on a gallon of diesel, even if the thing is emitting let's say 10% more, and that's a way big number of oxides of nitrogen, which was the thing that VW got hammered about, than a standard car, it would hardly amount to anything because it's only burning a gallon of it. This would have been a great thing. It would have been a boon for the environment, for people's pocketbooks, and of course, it got curb stomped. I don't think it's coincidental that Volkswagen itself got curb stomped because Volkswagen was the only car company that had a whole model lineup of high efficiency diesel engines that you could buy, diesel powered cars, I should say, that you could buy for less than $25,000. These things got more than 50 miles per gallon. And that really made electric cars look stupid. And I think that is the underlying reason why Volkswagen got crucified over the so-called cheating on government emissions tests.
Wow. I've also gathered that you don't like George W. Bush.
No,
so
that's very, very mildly.
Okay, so do you believe that 9/11? Oh, go ahead.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Let's unpack this a little bit. I'll start by saying that one of the writers I admired coming up was Hunter Thompson, who I'm sure you're familiar with, and Hunter Thompson had Nixon. I've got Bush. I wasn't around for Tricky Dicky, but Bush, I to this day, every time I see that squinty-eyed little psychopath, it just ruins my day. And listening to him pathologize disagreement. Remember that? You're either with us or you're against us. and the way that he peddled fear instead of trying to calm the situation down. Look, I don't know exactly what happened on 9/11. I have my suspicions that a lot of it was fishy, but at the end of the day, we all have questions, don't we? And he made it almost a criminal act in the Orwellian sense to question anything that was the official narrative. You're supporting the terrorists. And this whole thing with the TSA that came along during his reign to habituate and normalize the treatment of people who had done absolutely nothing to warrant it, as if they had just been arrested and processed and were convicted felons being introduced into prison, to submit to arbitrary and degrading authority. Stand here, spread your legs, let a government goon stick his hands up your pants or around your wife or girlfriend or mother's breasts and into their purse. It's disgusting. And 20 years of that have habituated people to being degraded and treated like that. And that made them much more receptive to putting on the face diaper and practicing all the idiot sick kabuki that we've endured for the last 3 years. So yeah, George W. Bush will always hold a dark place in my dark heart.
You actually kind of touched on the rest of my question there. So you're not sure about 9/11 being an inside job, I gather?
Well, all I know is that there are a lot of things that prompt me to ask questions. At the time, I lived up in DC. I grew up in that area. So I'm very, very familiar with the Pentagon and with the area around the Pentagon. And one of the questions that I've had since the day that happened is that, if you're familiar with the area, you'll know that on a nice fall day like that, there would have been hundreds, if not thousands of people walking around with cameras because they're tourists taking pictures of things. It also is an area that is saturated with security cameras. And I find it very curious that, as far as I can tell, and I've looked at it for years, there is not a single either video or still frame picture of an airplane flying toward the Pentagon. I've never seen it. And that kind of bothers me. And another thing that really bothered me was at the time, and again, I was living up there at the time, local news coverage when and I'll put it in air fingers quotes, 757 flew into the side of the Pentagon. The initial coverage of that showed a hole that was not large enough diameter to accommodate a 757. And even more tellingly, the windows on either side of the hole were intact and also above. So I asked myself, where did those two huge Pratt and Whitney jet engines go? Where did the vertical stabilizer go? I mean, I don't know. I'm asking questions because I think they're legitimate questions. We'd like to have answers to them. Of course, there's in New York, the phenomenon of Building 7 that seems to have just symmetrically collapsed into its own footprint, something that, as far as I can tell, has never happened in the history of tall building construction. Very suspicious, very strange. And I think it's a tragedy that we have not had answers to these questions, real answers.
Yeah, and the BBC actually reported that it fell, 20 minminutes before it actually did. So
yeah, I saw that also. I saw that also. And of course, NST said, their explanation for the fall of the two trade towers was the combination of the jet fuel fire heat weakening the beams, and of course the impact of the airplanes themselves that caused the structure to fail. Okay, that's plausible. I'll say that that's a plausible thing. The problem with WTC 7 is that it wasn't hit by any airplanes. And there were no jet fuel fires. There were office fires. So how did the supports of that building, and I think there was something like 24, 25 structural components, vertical elements, how did they all fail at the same time so that the building would go straight down rather than topple over or in some common sense way fail rather than the very bizarre way that it did fail?
Yeah. And also, a lot of people don't hear about this, but there are some Israeli spies called the Dancing Israelis.
I've heard about that too.
They were reported to be celebrating when this happened, and they actually, on Israeli TV, they admitted that they were there to watch the towers, go down. So they had advanced knowledge. So there's lots of things that I think denote that there was a plan to do that. Anyway, I never heard you talk about it. So
it's something that got people to think, but it also sent a message. I think psychologically, it was, if it's what we think it may have been, it was a way for the people behind the curtain to send a message. Look, we can do this. And I think it was sort of our generation's version of what happened in 1963 in Dealey Plaza, when Kennedy was publicly executed. And, they sent a message. This is what happens. I think that's my interpretation of it.
Yeah. What is a current news story that you think is the most concerning for you right now?
Boy, where to even begin with that? Well, this business with Trump is quite bothersome. And I'm not sure exactly what to make of it, other than it seems clear to me that they are attempting to set this predicate for, once again, the pathologizing, the weaponizing of political disagreement and the framing of it as seditious, as treasonous, as they put it, a threat to our democracy. And I don't know what will happen if indeed they end up actually indicting Trump and frog marching him into the clink somewhere, and whether the plan is for that to incite something and then to use whatever happens as the excuse for some type of grotesque overreaction. One of the things that's very concerning to me is that it doesn't seem that Biden and the people around him are particularly concerned about the November elections. Normally, in normal times, the most cynical of politicians understands that they have to get reelected. And so they at least have to pretend to throw some bones, to the electorate in order to get past the election. These guys don't seem to care at all. And so, what does that imply? Maybe they know something that we don't. I'm very careful to not step over into ground that I can't substantiate. I'm just telling you, it gives me the willies to make me, makes me concerned about, what they may know that we don't know.
Yep. Can you tell me what your thoughts are on environmental social governance, or ESG?
Well, it's appalling. It's a vehicle once again to establish this political orthodoxy, and it's very much of a piece with what they do in China with the social credit thing, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where in order to be allowed to participate in economic activity, you have to be a good little widget in good standing with the authorities. And they're doing the same thing with corporate America now, where it's no longer about providing a product or a service at a good price and a good value. It's about signaling your virtue. I wrote a piece this morning that's up on the site about Toyota. And I don't want to single out Toyota because it's not just them, but Toyota apparently has been giving $100,000 to this LGBTQ thing in Los Angeles. And they put on a drag race, get the double entendre there. It's a car thing, so it's a drag race featuring transsexual drag queens, teaching kids about that sort of thing, and that's a way for them to boost their ESG score. And it makes me sad. I would like to go back to the days when a car company worried about building cars, not funding this sort of thing.
Yeah, I've heard that, even really bad, environmental companies can boost their ESG scores if they just do something like, an LGBT, Pride Month. Like I saw some Pride Oreos in Walmart.
I saw those too.
And I thought to myself, because I didn't really know much about this. I heard the term, but when I saw the Pride Oreos, I'm like, man, this is ridiculous. And then when I heard about this, I'm like, oh, maybe they're just trying to boost their ESG score, maybe get a couple extra loans from the big people.
Right, exactly. And they're trying to erect, it's a co-opting thing. It's an attempt to get all economic activity in this country under the umbrella of this political orthodoxy of the left. That's fundamentally what this is all about, and to make it very difficult for anybody to question or divert from it, because what they'll do is cancel you. They'll make it impossible for you to work. They'll make it impossible for you to be hired. They'll get you fired. If you're a business, they'll put you out of business by characterizing you as phobic this, trans that, whatever the terminology happens to be. And it's been very effective to date. I'm hoping, though, that since it's become much more concrete than abstract, as it has been in the past, and by that I mean, as a society, we've been able to indulge a lot of nonsense for the last 50 years because, it's peripheral. Okay, I'm going to pay a little bit more for this, or, there's going to be some minor inconvenience over that, or I just have to shut my mouth and not say certain things that I know are going to get me in trouble at work. But now it's getting to the point where people are really becoming aware of the fact that their standard of living is being dramatically eroded. Their personal freedom is being dramatically eroded, and they're being degraded at a profound level as human beings. You're not allowed to have thoughts anymore. You're not allowed to be an individual anymore. The woke left talks all the time about diversity, but that's the last thing they want, except in the most superficial sense. Their diversity is different skin color, what your sex happens to be, who you have sex with, the most superficial and trivial, irrelevant things, the things that make us human, who we are, what do we think about things, what questions do we ask, what are our values? If they differ from what the woke left's values are, then there's no diversity at all. They are the most homogenous body of people you can possibly imagine, intellectually speaking.
Okay. I want to pivot over just briefly to a few small questions, basically social and spiritual questions. Hope you don't mind.
Sure.
Do you believe that human beings are in a fallen state? Specifically, do you believe that sinful desires prevent people from living out their true potential? And do you believe that Jesus Christ is the remedy for that?
I'm not sure about Jesus Christ. I'll be very direct and honest about that. My girlfriend is a Christian, and she and I talk about this all the time. But I do believe in the fallen state of man. I think that we all have this defective nature, if you will, this tendency, and it's perhaps due to our animalistic nature, perhaps it's due to something more profound, a fallen state of grace, if you will. But we are all prone to doing bad things, and it takes a conscious act of will to not do those bad things and to act in a manner that comports with our consciously expressed values. Otherwise, we become bad people and bad things. It's imperative that we that we think and we act and we're conscious of what we do, as opposed to just sort of sleepwalking through life, which unfortunately a lot of people do.
Did you grow up in church as a kid, or did you kind of have no religious background?
Well, kind of, sort of. I grew up in, I'll call it hard bench Protestantism, meaning, went to church with the family, sat on that hard wooden pew as a kid, squirming because it made my butt hurt, listening to what to me was a boring monologue, and just wanted to get out of there and get back on my bike and go play with my friends.
Okay. So what is your position on gender theory, LGBT, and transhumanism?
Well, obviously, I don't like gender in the first place. I've never liked that term. I prefer sex because I think it's more accurate. There's the male sex and there's the female sex, and sexes are not fungible. If a man puts on a dress and alters his genitalia, he does not become a woman. Now, as a libertarian, I'm okay with a guy if he wants to put on a dress and he wants to call himself Sheila instead of Stan. Hey, that's fine. I don't care about that. But I draw the line at Sheila, in air fingers quotes, telling me that I have to affirm that he is in fact a she, and endorse it and approve of it, which is a bridge too far for me, because it's not just a moral obnoxiousness. It's an abnegation of objective reality. The fact is, like it or not, you're either a man or you're a woman. There isn't any fungibility there.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. And where do you stand on abortion? We had the recent Roe v. Wade overturned. Do you think that's a good thing?
Well, first of all, it's my understanding of it, I'm not a lawyer. All that decision said was that the court found no authority at the federal level for a federal ban on abortions and remanded it to the states to make their own laws with respect to that. Now, personally, for me, purely and this is just how I see it, and I may be wrong, but as a matter of logic and a matter of biology, it seems to me it's inarguable that life begins at conception. And so, therefore, I am not in favor of abortion. I understand that there are hard cases. The left will always talk about the 10-year-old girl who got raped by somebody and who became pregnant. And these things are tragic, absolutely. But it's analogous to if you get attacked in an alley by a thug, and the thug steals your wallet. That's an awful thing to have happen to you. But does it mean that you then have the right to stand there in the alley and wait for the next guy to come along and take his wallet because somebody took yours? In other words, the fact that something bad happens to you doesn't give you the moral right to do something bad to an innocent person. That's my opinion on this. So, I'm as a purely moral matter, I'm anti-abortion. I don't like the terms pro-choice. I think that's an oily term. And I also think that, broadly speaking, it has had devastating consequences for us as a society and a culture to get into this cheapening of life. Others have commented on this disposability of life. If you can dispose of a developing baby, why not dispose of an inconvenient grandmother or a child that's problematic, that's difficult to raise? If we're not entitled, each of us, to full rights as human beings and to respect on that basis, then I think we're all in great danger.
Great. Well, that pretty much sums up the questions I wrote down. Definitely would like to do another one whenever you'd like. If
Sure.
it doesn't have to be soon, but just can you tell people how to reach you or how to find your content?
Yeah, sure. Easiest thing to do is just to go to the site, which is epautos.com. If they want to ask questions, there are little things at the bottom of each article. You can click on it. It says Ask Eric, and you can ask me anything you want to, whether it's just a mundane question about a car, a new car, used car repair question, or if you have a question that's got something to do with the things we've been talking about, political things, philosophical things, you can do that too. We have a very active comments section and some really bright people who I'm extremely grateful to have participating and from whom I learn things all the time. So I encourage those listening to go there and check out the comments section especially.
But I've always enjoyed hearing you on the David Knight Show because I feel like I learn something new every time. That's one reason why I wanted to bring you on, man. I really appreciate you for coming and visiting me.
And by the way, let me give a shout out to David, who's become a friend of mine over the years. David is top shelf, and those who aren't familiar with David Knight's show, I strongly recommend they check him out. He's, I think, one of the best voices on our side that's out there right now.
All right. Well, this will conclude our episode today, and thanks for joining us, everybody.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video with friends and family. You can follow me on Facebook at Untethered Truth Prevails. You can also find me on Twitter at UntetheredVince. If you'd like to give to me financially, you can go to Patreon, and you can find me there at Untethered Creations. I'm also on Venmo, and you can find me if you go to Vince-Barton-1. Once again, I really appreciate you all for joining me, and I wish you good success in the pursuit of truth. Grace and peace to you all.